on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, living abroad while Black. We, like you, are dealing with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and are taking precautions. We are working with limited staff, and our guests are joining us remotely. Ghana, Costa Rica, London, Paris, and the Caribbean, the top places where Black Americans have found a new home outside of the United States. In this so-called Blaxit or Black exit, many are especially motivated to leave behind the overt racism unique to America. In fact, the numbers of expats of color has risen sharply during the last few years, leaving some to call it the second Great Migration, after the first run from 1916 to 1970, during which 6 million African Americans left the South, hoping for better opportunities in America's North and West. Who are these motivated runaways, and are they finding what they wanted? To be free of a white gaze through which they are almost always seen as less than. Joining us remotely, Audrey Edwards, journalist and author who left New York for Paris after Donald Trump was elected president. She's also the author of the book American Runaway, Black and Free in Paris in the Trump Years. Mohameda El Muhajir, a digital marketer who moved from New York to Accra, Ghana in 2014. Krishan Wright, founder of Blaxit Global and host of the Blaxit Global podcast. And Zena Martin, an expatriate who lived in London and Paris for 20 years before moving back to the U.S. to be closer to family. Welcome to all of you. Now let's see, Mohammed, I think I'm going to start with you. You've been living in Ghana for 7 years. Thought very carefully after extensive travel about settling there. What was it that was the final motivation for you to move to Ghana?
Well, initially when I came, it was for a 1-year fellowship. So I didn't just drop everything and move right away. And I thought that would give me an opportunity to sort of get my feet wet. But I saw a lot of change beginning to happen during even Obama's administration, where I felt like this racial tensity that I hadn't ever felt before. And it just made me very sensitive. And I came to Ghana on a trip, and on that trip, I was like, this is it. And so I just started planning. And then within 6 months, I came to start my fellowship for a year and stayed on after that.
And I'm going to assume there are no regrets.
Never, not a day. I keep thinking maybe I'm in the honeymoon stage. I thought after the first year, okay, the second year, okay, 5 years, I don't know, I'm 7-year itch. I don't know, but I'm still here. I'm still loving it every day. I have not had one regret. So yeah, this is home for the foreseeable future.
Okay. So Zena, you finally made it overseas after your employer some time ago, your first one, said to you, no, you couldn't move on behalf of the company, but you took yourself anyway.
I did.
What was the motivation for you at that point to live abroad?
For me, it was basically that I really wanted to experience living somewhere else. I had lived in several places in the United States, and I just had a sense of adventure. So much like Mohameda, I thought I was only going for a 1-year adventure. And 1 year turned into 2, turned into a year in Paris, turned into 5 years where I acquired dual citizenship. And then the next thing I knew, it was 20 years. I just loved every minute of it, even when it wasn't always perfect.
No regrets then, too, right?
None whatsoever.
Okay. Now, Audrey, you wrote a book about why you left, American Runaway. But explain it. Even if you felt that, and a lot of people were saying at that time, a lot of Black people anyway, I'm leaving the country if Trump gets elected. But you actually did it.
I did, Callie, and I didn't think I would have to. I kept saying, if Trump gets elected, I'm leaving the country. I never thought for a minute that would happen. And when it did happen, I knew people in Paris. I thought, however, I was going to be in Paris only 3 months. I really thought that in 3 months, the United States would realize a mistake had been made. and Trump would be out. Boy, was I wrong. So I went from thinking I would be away for a little break to really thinking about how am I going to make this more of a permanent move.
And when you realized it was going to be more of a permanent move, were you feeling okay about it? No regrets in terms of making that move?
You know, I had not thought in terms of being a permanent expat, and I'm not a permanent expat now. COVID, derailed my stay in Paris. I came back during the holidays. We were hit with a lockdown, and I'm still here waiting to go back. But like Zena, I have family here. I have a son, I have grandchildren. So I'm now thinking of Paris as a second home. I've always had a second home. I've never had a second home internationally. But I'm comfortable with, in fact, I like having another place to be, another place to have community, another place to have friends, another place to have to navigate and manage a life that appeals to the runaway in me, so to speak.
That runaway has a kind of double entendre thing in this conversation, but you meant that, right, Audrey?
Yes, I talk about that in the book.
Okay.
Running has been part of our history from the beginning.
Yes. So, Krishan, you've traveled extensively, not yet lived abroad, but you are so getting ready to go that you started a whole podcast and a whole industry around helping you and other folks who are thinking about it seriously and doing it to get in position to live abroad. What's motivating you to want to live abroad?
That's a great question. I feel so free when I'm abroad. It's addictive, to be outside of the US and to be seen as a person first. And it just is so liberating. So I love traveling the world, meeting other people, being embraced in every country that I've been in. And I just don't have that, unfortunately, that same experience when I'm in the States.
Well, I want to pick up on that because what you hear, part of your global podcast, is to interview expats about their experience. And of course, we take who we are wherever we go. And they're expressing different experiences, as you have felt in a short-term way while traveling. When you talk to all the folks that you talk to, and I should mention you have 10,000 people who are listening to your podcast, what are they saying? Black folks, are they saying, I need to be someplace else where I don't have to be Black first? Tell me about that.
People we get real clear on your why, because your why is what's going to sustain you. I try and reinforce that just leaving the US or wherever you call home is not going to magically remove every issue that you have. So for a lot of people, it can be everything from economics to racism to being shut out of opportunities and just feeling, kind of similar to me, that ability to be free and be seen as a human being. And not that we're trying to, negate, where we come from or that we're Black. It's just knowing that as Black people of the diaspora, our spores have been sprinkled all over this planet. So there's no place that we can't or shouldn't inhabit. And so it's being able to break free of that construct in the United States, which you said in the lead-in is just very unique to the United States, and realizing that you can achieve the American dream, but outside of America.
So, Zena, explain to someone who's listening to this conversation and never been abroad about what the difference is being Black in America and Black for you in London and Paris primarily.
Well, I think that the differences are very much what Krishan was saying, in the sense that you are often seen as a person first, and your color may or may not matter. That does not mean that there is not racism, as Krishan was saying. There are definitely people who experience racism. In my case, it was often more institutional. At some of my jobs, I hasten to say, some of them were fabulous. Others, perhaps not so much because of that institutional racism. But you do feel that sense of freedom. There is not that same history although obviously slavery existed in the UK and things like that, but there is not that same, the chains, the burden that you carry with you, perhaps the fear that you might experience just walking around. One of the things that I absolutely loved about London and Paris was the diversity of so many people when you're on public transportation or walking around and hearing the different languages and seeing lots of different people. Whereas I would say that in many places in the US, unless it is a really big city, there's just a lot of segregation still. And, even say in churches or things like that. And that I really enjoyed just having that sense of freedom and being able to travel to so many other places. Within 2 hours, you could be in another country and really soak up that culture. And that was truly wonderful.
So, Mohammed, you're in a primarily Black country, but yet it's not America. So, having lived in New York, well, you've lived everywhere, but having lived in New York extensively and now in Accra, what's the difference in terms of how racism may or may not play itself out?
Well, I'll say this. I went to Howard University, HBCU, and sometimes I joke that living in Ghana is like Howard, but like the country, like, you know what I mean? So of course, I always liken it to like a Black college experience, right? I mean, at Howard, oh my God, it's Black excellence. It's beautiful, it's hip, everything, but there's all this like dysfunction that, Black people have, somebody stealing funds in the A building, even most recently, students had like, there were issues with the water or, mold in the dorms. And you're like, really, this is like 2020. Like, what's going on? So it's like this love-hate thing. So racism is not there, right? But there's all these other things that Black folk got all over the world. So, overt racism like that may not be an issue, although there is, because Accra is a very international, cosmopolitan city. To be fair, most of the business class community are foreign. So they're Lebanese, they're French, they're English. So there are a lot of different races. There are certain places that, we all know, and we're like, yeah, we're not going there because we don't even feel like it's Africa because they want their safe spaces, right? So, there are racial issues that exist, but it's not like I don't have to deal with them unless, I put myself, in those particular circumstances. So that's what I would definitely say. But it's definitely, if any of you, have attended or been to a Black college campus, that's probably like the best example that I could give.
Okay, Mohammed. Come on. Audrey, you have written extensively in your book about just being startled by not getting the reaction that you would get in the United States. Explain.
What I have always said about the French, Callie, is that they let me be. I can go anywhere. I can go into the ritziest restaurant. I can go into the ritziest department store. And there is not this visceral reaction to my Blackness. I'm not followed, which has happened to me in America. People don't look at me like, why are you here? Which has happened in America. And what I say about the French is that they grant you two things, your humanity and your autonomy. And that means I can sit in a cafe all day, which I have done. And no one is bothering me. There's no one bringing me the check indicating it's time for you to go now. Their attitude is you ask for the check when you're ready to go now. And that's a world of difference. There's also a feeling of safety. Most European countries, I would dare say all, do not have the proliferation of guns that we have in America, which leads to a climate of security. I don't worry that somebody is going to mug me. I don't worry that I'm going to get into an altercation and somebody going to pull a gun and shoot me. These are the kind of things I worry about in New York and in the United States. I mean, it's really more prevalent outside of New York, to tell you the truth. But there is a feeling of safety, there's a feeling of autonomy, and there's a feeling of being granted basic respect for your humanity, which are little things you would think, but in America, where that is rare, it becomes huge when you're outside of America.
So, Krishan, one of the things that it would seem to me, and some of you have written and spoken about it, that with your people that you interview must talk about a lot is building a community, because there are not that many of us wherever we go, except where Muhammad is. And so there would seem to me to be some sense, perhaps, but you tell me what you're getting from the interviews that you, from the people that you talk to who have lived abroad extensively, about do they feel a loss of community, or is their community just becomes a whole different thing? And when I say community, I mean Black community. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we are, as people, as Black people, we're very communal. So as soon as we get somewhere, the first thing we want to do is find someone else. And so, and I think at this time, it's really special because we have technology to facilitate that. So yes, I have Blaxit Global, which is really like a catch-all, but then there are these Facebook groups for, you know, Costa Rica, Mexico, et cetera. So you have these digital communities, and then people make these connections and get together wherever their new home country is. And then there's also communities like Black in Bali. And so it's really special that, you know, people are able to leverage technology to get that sense of community, as well as what I think is really unique about the Black expat experience is even when we make that journey to an adopted country, we still have this ability and desire to pour back in to encourage other people to make that journey as well.
Zena, was it important to you to have Black community in London?
Absolutely. What I would say, though, is that when I first moved there, the technology did not exist. There was not social media. You know, and there were no podcasts, things like that. I'm really aging myself now, but, so I had to find my community, much of which probably was individual instead of, you know, groups, because, you know, now there's a links chapter, for instance, in London, but that did not exist when I first moved there, things like that. And you don't have the groups that perhaps we have in the United States. So I made friends, but did not necessarily have a whole Black community. I didn't have, you know, my crew, basically. And so that was more challenging. And then I also just really poured myself into a lot of charitable works. I served on boards and things like that. And that was not necessarily Black community, but at least it was community. And that certainly helped.
So Mohammed, you've talked about the embracing large community, but I wonder if your Americanness sets you apart in Africa. So does that make some kind of difference in the way that you build community in a mostly Black country?
I mean, I'm definitely a foreigner, you know, although if I'm just walking around on a day-to-day and not talking, you know, nobody knows that. But I mean, I am, you know, an American, so there's a lot of cultural differences, you know, and I have to learn this culture that I'm in, and also try to help people understand, you know, my culture and perspective as well. So, you know, for the most part, I feel like I'm embraced in the circles that I'm in, but also I have a lot of respect for, you know, the people and the society here. Like, I mean, the way that I approach it, I'm never like, oh, I'm American and I know everything and we're, you know, so much better in the West, you know, just the typical American. Like, I'm very humble, but I've been traveling my whole life. So I learned that along the way. Even sometimes people are like, you don't seem like an American, you know? So, yeah, I mean, I just try to blend in and connect as much as I possibly can. And I have, you know, this yearning to understand, like, you know, I feel like I'm connecting with like my lost culture, even though I mean, I haven't done DNA tests or anything like that, but I'm like, this is the ground that my ancestors walked on. I want to understand the music and the language. And I love going to, like, I know this only makes sense in Ghana, but in the Ashanti culture, funerals are like these huge celebrations. So it sounds crazy, but I'm like, I love going to funerals. But that's one of the times that.
Wait a minute, that sounds like New Orleans. Come on now.
Okay, yes, exactly, yes. So we got it authentic, but that's when I feel like I'm like transported through time, because all these people that I see on a modern day, driving cars and suits, you see them suddenly with like, traditional cloths, and, the chiefs come out, and like, it's like you're transformed back to a different time. So I love being able to connect with that. I feel like I'm, reestablishing, like, like I'm like a person with amnesia, and I'm rebuilding, what was lost. So even though, I try not to stand out as an American unless somehow it's going to benefit me, but otherwise I like to just blend in as much as possible.
Okay.
And there are times when you know when to be American and when not to be.
Yeah, I bet there are.
I'm sure you all can.
Audrey, you had a bit of a community already in Paris, because you had spent some extensive time there before. So when you went this time, post-Trump, you had a bit of a built-in community. Did you ever feel like you were missing Black community?
No, and one of the reasons, Callie, I chose Paris has a history of Black American community. It has a history of Black Americans going to Paris since the early 1900s, seeking refuge from American racism. And the history started in World War I, when a number of Black American soldiers were fighting alongside the French, developed relationships. And what the French developed was a real respect and almost reverence for Black Americans, for our history, for our style, our music, our literature. So there's always been this symbiotic relationship between the two. In addition, for me, I knew people who already lived in Paris. My roommate from college, who's a white girl, as I call her, married a Frenchman, has been in Paris 30 years, has 3 children, so she's not planning to come back to America. I lived with her when I first tried to retire to Paris in 2007. At that time, the euro against the dollar was just too strong and I couldn't afford it. But I know Black Americans who lived there. I met many more when I moved. So the sense of community for me has always existed in that city, which is really one of the reasons I chose it. Plus, it's just a beautiful city. It's just extremely gorgeous. And I like French people. I may be one of the few people who actually likes French people. And my attitude, people say they're aloof and they're arrogant. And my attitude is, anybody who creates this much beauty, this much style, you can be arrogant. I'm not mad. I give it to you.
So, Krishan, in your conversations now, are you feeling or seeing the drumbeat of lots more Black Americans looking to leave? Where is that conversation on your podcast now?
Absolutely. Much to my surprise, and the podcast is less than a year old, we have grown exponentially. And usually I've been able to see some patterns. So unfortunately, when things are, rough in America, whether it be on the political landscape or unfortunate, police interaction with someone, you see like an influx of people. But there are more people that, are curious. They want to know what it's like in country X, what it's like for Black people, what it's like, to move your car, or really a big thing for many expats is, one, creating that sense of community, but then also preparing your family and then maintaining that connection, because you can break up with America, but you can't necessarily as easily unentangle yourself from your family. So, just making sure that, we give people the resources and tools to have those conversations, to, know that they have, even if there's challenges with making that break, that Blaxit Global can serve as that support system as well.
So are you seeing that in the past there might have been a lot more, maybe not, but now people are like, you know what, I'm just going?
Yes, there's definitely, we usually have, opportunities for people to put their date, and then, I kind of keep track of people, and we'll, celebrate their move, and just, cheer them on, and just be that support, because every day there's a challenge. It may be a challenge with getting residency. It may be a challenge with finding a job or starting a business, whatever it is. But we're there to support in any way.
In the last seconds, when are you leaving, Krishan? Everybody else has been. When you leaving, girl?
2023. As soon as my daughter graduates high school, I am making my move.
And where you going?
Right now, it's looking like Costa Rica.
Okay.
So I'm going for my exploratory trip later this year.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. And I thank all of you for joining me on the broadcast. That's the end of our show. Thanks to all of our guests. And thank you for joining us. Stay with us as we continue our conversation on Facebook and Twitter. We're on Facebook and Twitter with our post show, continuing our discussion on living abroad while Black. So here's a question for all of you, and that is, it seems to me that everybody can't go, that it takes a certain amount of resources, really, cash money for one thing, and other kinds of resources. Some of you mentioned it, family support and other things, in order to make a permanent move or a semi-permanent move. I'd love each of you to speak to that. Zena, I'll start with you.
You're right. It definitely can take resources. I was quite fortunate, also maybe a little bit crazy at the time. I went over there with no job and no work permit. And I didn't really know that many people. And I just started interviewing. I was very fortunate that I was sponsored by a public relations company, and they sponsored my work permit. And then it took 3 months for that to come through, and I was back in America, and my family kept saying, "Do you really have a job? What's going on with that?" And then I was able to have employment. Quite frankly, I took quite a pay cut when I first moved there, and I had to move my way back up the food chain, if you will, to kind of get back up to my corporate status that I had held in the United States. But I know that can definitely be a challenge in terms of resources. If you don't have a company sponsoring you, and until you can acquire citizenship or permanent residency, you need some support. And it's wonderful that, for instance, Blaxit Global exists, because I was doing all this on my own, girl. I wish you had been there, Krishan, when I started.
Yeah, exactly. Mohammed, what about you? What does it take what kind of resources do you need to make the move to Ghana?
You need a lot of resources. I will say this: people have in their minds usually that, oh, I'm coming to Africa, everything is going to be like really cheap. And most capital cities in Africa are very, very expensive. As I mentioned, they're very cosmopolitan. So there are a lot of people who come and do business from all over the world. So things are expensive. Like if you want to live a similar lifestyle that we're accustomed to, in the States. So, rents always catch people really off guard. And the jobs, there are no jobs really for expats. Very, small numbers. There are people who work for NGOs or who maybe work for, the American Embassy, but very small number of jobs that pay international salaries. And the salaries in Ghana are probably 5-10% of what we would typically make, right? So I find that most of the Black Americans who move are, senior citizens who have pensions or who are getting Social Security or something like that because they have income from the U.S. that, when it converts to Ghana cedis, which is the currency here, they're able to live a nice, comfortable lifestyle. So it's very difficult for young people, there are not a lot of young people who are able to live here because they can't sustain themselves financially. So that's, a very big hurdle that, the young people who are interested, they're looking at social media, like Afrochella, all these like really cool things. But they're like, what jobs are there? And I'm like, you have to come here as an entrepreneur looking to build and set something up, which is a difficult, that's not easy on its own. But there are some jobs. I mean, when I came to do my fellowship, I, received a stipend that was in US dollars, and it wasn't a lot, but it still allowed me to, have a decent lifestyle. So that's one of the biggest challenges. It definitely is. And if it's something that you want to do, people they save for it too.
Oh, okay. All right. Audrey?
Callie, I left for what I guess would be called political reasons. And what I say is we have a history. We had 6 million people in the South who packed up and moved. So depending on what your motivation is, you will find a way. The people the Black expat community in particular in Paris, many of them had been in Paris long before I even thought about moving. But again, we have a history going back to Josephine Baker and Richard Wright and James Baldwin. Lenny Kravitz has a home in Paris. And what I say to people, you don't have to think of moving as a permanent relocation. But for me, politically, being able to get away, and we can all do that, whether you go to Bermuda for a week, whether you go to Costa Rica, whether you go to Ghana. I've been to Ghana, I went on vacation. The idea of getting a perspective from America from afar, I have found has been very helpful to me psychologically, very helpful emotionally. And I think we can all do that. I don't subscribe to the notion that you have to have a lot of money. I was a senior citizen, meaning that I do collect Social Security. I had friends, I had some resources, but I would have had that whether or not Trump got in. And when he did get in, I decided to channel my resources to getting away. And again, we come from a people who have packed up and moved when our political, economic circumstances called for it. And let me also say, I think people who make the move, I think all of us sitting here, it's the immigrant mentality, meaning you make a decision that I want to be somewhere else. And once you make that decision, you figure out how to do it. You just figure it out.
Well, Krishan, are you thinking resources and how you're preparing to go? You ready, in that way? I mean, is that something maybe because Zena was saying she wished she had you, but see, now you knew and know what you have to do, right? Yeah.
Yes, I was blessed to have this runway ahead of me. So I still have about 2 years, but I made the decision several years earlier. And so that gave me the ability to think about what countries I was interested in, looking at what the dollar was and how far it would take me in another country, looking at the cost of living. And surprisingly, and that's been the benefit of the community, is it's really, depending on where you go in the world, it can be significantly cheaper to live abroad than it is to live in America. So as I'm looking at everything, I've gotten a financial planner. I run different scenarios. I've also learned a lot about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. And so it's just creating that nest egg that will enable me to move, especially since I'm in that in-between stage. I'm too old for a work visa, depending on the country, and too young for a retirement visa. So while I'm in this gap space, my plan is to really make sure that I shore up my resources to support me as I figure out the rest of the path.
So what one thing would you all offer as advice, or if not advice, consideration, something, observation that anybody listening to this conversation should really ponder if they are thinking about making the kinds of moves that you have? I mean, Audrey, I take your point that we have always run and we have always found a way on the other side. But I think it's always helpful to have those of you who are already in position to offer some perspective about what someone else thinking about this might keep top of mind as they're pondering this. So, Mohammed, I'll start with you.
I would say that wherever you just accept the fact that wherever you're moving to is not America. The longer that you compare while you're there, well, we do it like this in America, and they need to get their customer service together, and they need to do this. You are not. You won't last. I have a very good experience because I accept this place for what it is. I know if I wanted to be in America, I could be there in 10 hours, and all the conveniences that I dream of, I could have them. So wherever it is that you go, accept the differences and enjoy them. Like, you know what I mean? Like that is one of the major things. People suffer, and usually even in Ghana, which has a very large African-American community, which started when the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, came into power, where he opened that, the doors to Ghana to African Americans. We have been here, and we have to just really accept. And it's beautiful once you let go that it's a different place and all these differences. You can have a wonderful experience, but the longer you hold tight to how it's not like it is in America, you will suffer. So that would be my number one tip. I know it's easier said than done, but just to have that awareness. And we are very American, even though we think, we're second class or whatever, we are very American. So sometimes we have to let that go. So that's my tip.
All right, Audrey?
And I agree completely. One of the things, we as Americans are spoiled. We really are. And we don't think in terms of being spoiled until we're out of America. The first thing I had to come to terms with my first winter in Paris, which turned out to be the coldest winter in Europe in 30 years, was living in an apartment, the whole apartment is about the size of the room I'm sitting in now, my second bedroom in Brooklyn. No central heat, one space heater, 12 inches by 24. My first night, I am laying under the duvet and saying to myself, I miss America. I didn't miss America. What I missed was central heat. And I say in the book, people, that is the power, central heat. Ghana, the first time I went to Ghana, I had a roommate. We stayed at the University of Accra. She freaked out because the beds did not have a top sheet. She freaked out over no top sheet. What I will say about me, because I love Paris so much and I was so happy to be away from Trump, the very next morning, I was over my energy crisis over not having central heat. It's like, okay, you know what? You can deal with this. You're freer than this. You can live with a space heater, but you have to be willing to do that.
Zena.
I would absolutely agree with what has already been said. But one thing I want to say is that, we've been talking a little bit about runaways. I would surmise that actually Audrey, Mohammed, and I have actually been running to somewhere. And I think that my advice would be, think about where you're running to and look at that in its totality. And then when you're there, embrace it. I will be honest, when I first moved to London, I didn't want any American friends. I wanted all friends from anywhere else but America. Eventually, did actually acquire some American expat friends through various organizations and just friends in general. But it's, if you're moving to a country where the first language is something other than English, try to embrace that language. If you don't already speak it, learn it. Don't try and force people to speak English with you all the time. You may not be perfect, but wherever I have gone, they really appreciate that you're trying to learn their language, and they will help you. So all of that, embrace the culture, embrace the food. Don't be looking for your favorite, fast food places or whatever. I'm not going to lie. There's a Krispy Kreme donuts in Saudi Arabia. I've been to it. But they don't just be looking for that. And so that would really be my advice, because you may stay forever, and it may be a year. Live every moment as though, this could be the last day that you're there, and just say yes to all of the experiences that you can have.
Do you all feel anything about women traveling alone? Do you have any, all of you are women in this conversation. Does that make any kind of difference?
I like the fact that I could be alone in Paris. I loved feeling free to go to the movies by myself, to go have dinner by myself, to go sit in Luxembourg Gardens by myself, because again, the French respect autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are a woman out and about, there's not an assumption that you're waiting to be picked up. There's not an assumption that someone else can invade your space, because the French don't do that. So I felt very comfortable those times I was alone in Paris in particular.
Anybody want to add something?
I would say.
Yeah, I would add.
Sorry, Mohammed.
Go ahead, Mom.
I was that for me, my first solo trip was to New Zealand, and I was there for a little over 2 weeks, and I felt the safest I've ever been in another country. But I learned aspects about myself that I didn't even know was there. I hiked a volcano. I'm afraid of heights. I did kayaking. I don't know how to swim. I zip line. So there's a level of liberation, I think, that comes from solo travel. And as Audrey mentioned, just being able to be and inhabit a space and fill that space, and not think that, you have to fill it with someone else. So for me, that's been the greatest benefit and the unlock.
Mohammed?
I traveled to many places, and I feel the most safe in Ghana, and it's one of the safer, countries, even in Africa. Even other Africans come here and like, oh my God, I feel so safe. So that is, for me, I didn't ever understand how important safety was in feeling safe, or that I didn't feel safe before. I never really knew that until I came here. And as a woman, I'm sure I know there, rapes and assaults and things like that, but I never feel that ever walking around. And I see women, these are Black women, so they got bodies, okay? And they can be wearing the slinkiest little thing, and nobody is paying them any mind. Nobody's harassing them. They see so many big bums, like, you know what I mean? Like, nobody's even phasing them. So as a woman, I feel very, very safe. And I've traveled many places, even, by myself. And as, Audrey said as well, like, there are places that I travel as a Black woman where people just assume that I was like a sex worker. I'm like, those are the types of things that I just cannot deal with. So I feel I love that about Ghana. And I feel like, if someone comes, a solo traveler or just a small group of friends, they wouldn't really have many issues in a place like this.
Well, I've enjoyed this conversation. It reminded me of my trip to Paris, one of my trips to Paris years ago, back to using about learning the language. So I took my little high school French out, and I got in a cab with my friend, and I said in French to the cab driver where I was going. It was to a jazz club. And he turned around and he looked at me, fell across the steering wheel, beat on it, laughing so hard. And I said to him, you know what I said, just take me there. So,
Yes, the
I got
Parisians
there.
can be that way.
Yeah, exactly. So what an enjoyable conversation. I loved having it. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.